Now, we move on now, and we'll introduce the Rosalind McCutcheon. So, Rosalind is going to this.
Thank you very much, and I don't like microphones. Can you hear me? No. Who says no? Oh, it was you. Oh, all right. Well, that doesn't count. I know you. But seriously, if you do have a problem, put your hands up, please. Right. I need 6 hands here too. Right. Well, I think it still is good morning. Yes, it is. And I hope I won't eat into the lunch hour at all. Welcome to this talk about the Registry of Deeds. I know it is a very forbidding title, and a lot of people find the whole thing very forbidding, and they walk away rather than take a look at it. I'm hoping with this talk I might introduce you to some of the good things and the delights about it. When I first started talking about the Registry of Deeds, I tried to explain in my talks the step-by-step methods of searching, and I found that that didn't work. It's too complicated. So what I've done is I've done a 7-page guide with screen grabs and step-by-step. You know, is that up online or is it available? It will be available, so you can take that away and work with it at your own pace slowly and have it beside you. That's how I like to work on the computer as well. And so I'm going to just talk generally around the subject for you. But before I go any further, the previous speaker seems to have introduced herself, and I ought to introduce myself. I'm in a state of abject terror here, because this is the first time I've faced an audience in Cork. I faced them all over England, I faced them in America, I faced them in Scotland. I've never faced a Cork audience, and I can't tell you. I was born and brought up in Bandon, but I left a long time ago. Well, not all that long ago. I mean, let's be, yeah. But I left a fair while ago, and you know, it is quite a daunting thing to come back to your own home place and tell people about things. The other thing was, I was talking to a couple of people last night, and they sort of said, oh, well, of course, you'd probably be interested in the Registry of Deeds because you come from that sort of family that would be moneyed and interested. Well, if I tell you that my father's salary from 1944 till 1957 was £40 a year, £40 a year, as headmaster of Bandon Grammar School, because when it was set up, that was a handsome salary, but that was the 1640s, and nobody thought about inflation. So we didn't have pocket money, and we had hand-me-down clothes, so, you know, come on. Also, I was brought up at Church of Ireland, all my family were, and I was in Bandon, where even the pigs are Protestants, as we know. But that still doesn't put me in a box. On my father's side, they were small farmers. Some were bigger farmers than others. But one of them was a great friend of Thomas Davitt in the Land League, and he was himself jailed for his work in the Land League. On Mummy's side, they were in and out of trouble all the time, and one of them was hanged on the bridge in Wexford in 1798 because he was one of the leaders in the Wexford Rebellion on that side. So come on, don't put me in any boxes. Right? Okay. So where have we got to? We're on page 1, right? So we've got the handout and we've got the methodology, and let's launch straight into it. Now, I know most of you know all about history, probably better than me, but I know there's going to be some visitors here who don't. So bear with me while we do a little brief history as to why this odd resource was set up. We are. Right. Okay. Way back. We go back to 1641. I won't blind you with science before that. But the previous 40, 50 years, we'd had a determined onslaught in this country, fueled by the big surplus in the economy left by Henry VII. He was a parsimonious sort of king. He left bags of money, so they decided to throw some of it at subduing Ireland. And there was a fair amount carried on. But by 1641, Does this work?
It's not in there.
All right. Okay, fine. Let's get it up and working. The mouse isn't working. Look, here, right you go, grand. And that bit, right? There we are. Oh, don't you just love technology? Right, if I press that, does it happen? No. If I press that, does it happen? It does. Here we are. 1641, you will see, sorry, I put Catholic, Irish and Protestant on the right-hand side. That's not really what it was, but, you know, that's a very cheap sort of way of putting it. But anyway, 60% of the land holdings in Ireland, in spite of everything they'd done, were still held by, let's call them, native Irish. Less than 70 years later, in 1714, it had gone down to 5%. Now that makes a hell of a difference in a country, doesn't it? It's extraordinary. Most of it due to the horrors of Cromwell's campaign and the ensuing confiscations, and then finished off by all the troubles in finishing up with Boyne and Aughrim, after which they decided to set up the penal laws to whack. So you've got all these new people in Ireland holding land, but it's only one generation back and that sort of thing. They were rushing to make it all look legal. So in 1708, the Registry of Deeds was set up, and everybody was very keen on registering their land and registering this and registering that and putting it all on paper. Lots of people had leases that never got as far as the Registry of Deeds, but anything that was registered there, it took precedence over anything else that wasn't registered. So if there was any doubt in your mind, any problem, you went there and you registered. In addition, at that time, Ireland had no national bank, and the currency, you couldn't rely on it for a pipsqueak. The Bank of Ireland wasn't set up until 1783, so the currency was unstable. If you're doing any sort of long-term transaction, the only way to make it safe was to link it in somehow to land. So you might raise a small mortgage and use it like in the way somebody else would use a bank draft, you know, and trade it around. So everything that was long-term and important in people's lives, you know, went through in the form of leases and conveyances and what looks like boring mortgages on land. But when you start scratching, it's all human life is there. So you've got wills, you've got arrangements for extracurricular children, you've got annuities for aged aunties, you've got marriage settlements. Oh, that's just a nice picture of the outside. It is pretty forbidding, isn't it? You know, every single thing that affected people's lives. It's fantastic, and it's there to this day, absolutely intact. You know, all these people who tell you, oh, what are you doing Irish records for? So they were all went up in smoke. You know, come on. It's there. It's not touched. It's marvellous. There were recently, well, about 10 years ago, I think, plans to move it all into some place in the country where nobody could get at it, and then maybe eventually digitise it. But with the recession, that all went out the window. So we're safe. Problem is, it's very badly indexed, and it is difficult to use when you're a starter. And also, some people sort of say, "You don't want to be bothered with that. Sure, it's only for the money classes and the Protestant ascendancy and that sort of thing. It has nothing to do with your family." Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. And from the very beginning, I've seen umpteen native Catholic families having deeds between each other and registering them there. And when you think about it, the huge big landowners who'd be, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, and they've got thousands and thousands of leases going on. Sure, if one or two of them fail or there's some problem, that's no great thing in the scheme of things. So an awful lot of them never bothered to register in the Registry of Deeds. You know, they just held them all in their own archives. It didn't matter. But if you were a small, say, a brewer in a backstreet brewer in a provincial city, and you were leasing part of your backyard to somebody who was a cooper, you know, tied in nicely with your business. That'd be fine, but if things went wrong, oh my goodness. So the two of you would make very sure that you would draw up a lease and register it there. The deeds that were registered are only a fraction of the whole lot of deeds that are ever drawn up. But if there was any doubt in people's minds, they went and they registered in Dublin. And the funny thing is, you won't find many deeds there that were between Quakers, one Quaker doing business with another. And why? Because they all trusted each other, you know? And it's funny this now, but generally there were far more deeds registered coming out of Munster than there were out of Ulster. Because nobody down here trusted each other that far. So there's a wealth related to Cork and other Munster counties. I chuckle. I've never actually sat down, because you want to be a full-time job to kind of do an assessment of the deeds from that point of view. But I chuckle when I sort of see the evidence come and slap up at me. I work right through a book, and there's hardly one from Ulster. Fine. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I've been hurling things about the registered deeds generally, and people sort of still start shaking. So can I get down now to sort of a bit of nitty-gritty and tell you how it worked? So let's take a small merchant here in Cork. And he's got extensive outbuildings, okay? So he decides to lease part of the outbuildings to a carpenter. And they draw up a lease, and they get two locals to witness it. And being they're Cork men, they don't trust each other that much. So it's a huge transaction, and they make it watertight. They go to Dublin to register it. So what they do first is they pay the lawyer's office to make a copy, an exact copy of the first lease that they draw up. Now, the exact copy is not called a copy, it's called a memorial. So it's a peculiar term, but it's the memorial. And it's an exact copy, and one or other of the parties will sign that and saying, yep, that's a fair copy. And one of the witnesses to the original lease will sign it. And then he'll get on his horse and he'll go up to Dublin and he'll present it there in the Registry of Deeds. And he said, I've come to register it. And people there will take it and they will co-sign his signature. And then it's brought up to a room where there's the head clerk, the head honcho, and there are 3 or 4 clerks. And they're handed these leases. They come into work each day and they're each handed a few leases to work on. So in the mornings, the head honcho has all the next consecutive memorial numbers, because the deeds are numbered from 1 to, I don't know, 800,000, you know, all through the years until about 1830 something or other, 1840 something or other. But that's how they started them. So book 1 will have deeds number 1 to blah blah. But you'll have 3 or sometimes 4. I've got to know all their handwriting. I don't know their names, but I know their handwriting. And they're standing there and they read the leases, and then what they do, they read the memorial lease. They'll take the salient facts, because it might be 3 or 4 pages long, and they will praise it down, and they will put it in the book, and then they will note on the memorial the book number, the page number that they're working on. These books are there to this day. And the memorial number that the head honcho gave him to the next one he's working on. And then they'll write that on the memorial, and some other fella will take that after they've written it into an index as well, and take it down to the basement of the Registry of Deeds and roll it up and store it. And they're there to this day, the original memorials. But you don't go down there, you stay up with the books. Then the books, the memorials, were indexed in 2 different ways. They were indexed by names of the first parties, and they were also indexed under the townlands that were mentioned in the deed. Now, the townlands, wait a minute now, where are we? Yeah, the townlands. And I was going to show you one thing before, so we may as well, because it's in the order. The leases. You know, I was going on about how you'll find Catholics from the very first. Here's one. I'm pretty near all of those are Catholics, and that's a very early one, 1714. There's a quarryman. It's later. Sam, he might be, you know, whatever, but he's granting a lease, and that was the longest allowed under the penal laws to James Carroll, who's a hackney coachman. And 31 years is fair enough, because that represents mostly a man's working life, when you think about life expectancy then. So anyway, those are all fairly small people in Dublin, and the whole of the city, or the whole of the Registry of Deeds is absolutely bursting full of these 31-year leases. So they're there from the very beginning, ordinary, small, working people, Catholics and Protestants. Right, so we're getting on to the indexes. This is hard to read, but it will show you a typical page where you can look up under the name of the first party, but it's only the first party is indexed, and that's a flaming nuisance. But it will show you on the right-hand side the book, the page, and the number. But the land indexes are a lot more useful in that, I've taken one here, that's County Wexford. And here I'll hone in on Coulshall. On the left, that's the townland of Coulshall, and it's Mr. and Mrs. O'Riordan granting something to do with the land to Mr. O'Connell. So that's pretty local. And I do advise people who are small farmers and that sort of thing, to hone in on the townland indexes, look around the area. They can pick up their families quite often there. Even if they weren't the first parties, they'd be the second parties or whatever. I recently came across one to do with townlands in and around Cahir in Tipperary. And fair enough, the first party was Baron Cahir, and he was doing some sort of shady deal with rich businessmen in London over the land. But within the lease here, or the conveyance to them, he named 132 tenants in and around a few townlands. 132 tenants. Not only that, he named the particular townlands they occupied, and some of them were on long leases, some of them were on 31-year leases, and some of them were tenants at will who could be flung off at a moment's notice. So that was pretty comprehensive, and I like to think that that's now like a mini census of that area of care. And that was 1767. Marvellous. And the Registry of Deeds is full of these sort of things. I know a couple of people now in various areas in Ireland, and what they've done is they've gathered together on a local basis, and they've just taken the townlands in and around their village or whatever, and they have taken a look all the way through the Registry of Deeds. They've taken a look at what happened to those townlands. You know, they've extracted the details, and you can build up a pretty comprehensive thing of what is happening in that town, because it isn't just the bigwigs and the ones that own them, it's all the tenants who are involved, and it's people who were previous tenants, and somebody coming in as a witness. It's magnificent. Anyway, as I say, the land indexes are grand, the name indexes are pretty appalling. So to remedy this, 9 years ago, a colleague of mine, he's the webmaster of the IGRS, and he lives in Canberra in Australia, but that doesn't stop. And he set up the Registry of Deeds Index Project. It's in my handout. And there's a couple of us have been beavering away ever since. And what we do is we do just some sort of deeds, or else we take a book and we pledge it, or we pledge half a book, and we go page by page. We read through all these abstracts that are in the books, and we put them into a database, and we put everybody in. Not just this party, the first part, but the second part, the third part, the fourth part, the occupants, the children who were named in a lease, because sometimes if you did a long lease, you didn't say a lease forever, you said a lease for 3 lives. I don't know if you've come across that. So you'd find 3 people who were likely to have a decent life expectancy, but you might also put in a little clause saying if one of them popped his clogs, he could put in somebody else. So it was like a perpetual lease, but you named people, and very often you gave their ages. Oh, delicious. Lovely, lovely. Where are we now? Yeah. So we've been beavering away, and so far we have over 200,000 names. And these are all sorts of people. Sometimes they're just interested witnesses who would be local neighbours and so on. But you can see the task. Some 520 books, only up to 1,800. 600 pages to a book. Multiply that up. There's millions. There's millions and millions and millions of names there, and it's fantastic. Nick, this is old, so you can see I took that when it was only 110,000, but my technological genius does not allow me to take a screen grab of his latest one. I've tried and tried and I can't do it. But anyway, this lists roughly what you can do. You can search by name, you can search by townland, you can search in all sorts of different ways. You needn't take any notes because it's all in the handout. And he also gives you a guide as to how to order a memorial copy from the registry. I have that in my 7-page one as well. But he's done magnificent work there, and I understand there's a fellow indexer who's in the audience. Yes, grand. Beavering away, we kind of do it instead of knitting, I think. So, in addition, there's other ways that people have helped you find things in the Registry of Deeds. And years and years and years ago, a wonderful lady in Dublin, she got a team to help her, Beryl Eustace. And she went through the Registry of Deeds up to about 1830. And they picked out every one where it was a registered will. Now, we all know what happened to the wills in the forecourts, right? But these wills were registered in the Registry of Deeds. So they were safe. They didn't go up in smoke. And she went through and she listed them all and gave a full comprehensive abstract of them. And you can read them via the Irish Manuscripts Commission. I've given the link there. And they're wonderful, 3 huge volumes. Well, I myself, I've been beavering away at the Registry of Deeds for over 30 years. And I suppose I was partly guided by, her marvellous example, because I thought, I wonder has anybody done the same for marriage settlements? And anyway, as I worked through, I noticed that not only were there marriage settlements registered, but umpteen of the deeds that you'd find there made references to marriages. Like, my name's Tom O'Riordan, and I have the right to lease this out to Mr. Geraghty by right through my wife, and she got this through the marriage settlement of her grandmother, who was a Miss So-and-so. And I'm thinking, and then a bit more comes in through the marriage of the mother, and you have 3 maiden names, you have, with your rough generational sort of thing, you've got 3 generations of women marrying and that sort of thing. And I thought, it's nothing to do with my family, but blooming heck, they're not in the index because these were all other names other than the first party's name. I'm thinking, but somebody will kill for them. They're gold dust to somebody. So I said, somehow I've got to make note of them. So I started making note of them 25 years ago. And anyway, one thing led to another, and then I started seeing how I might make them available. So they're on the IGRS website, free. And then, as well, I kept falling over other little treasure troves of marriages. The naval certificates at Kew, which would mention a young cadet's mother and her maiden name, and give his baptismal date. And I thought, that's like a marriage, because we know that their parents married before that date, hopefully. And, for goodness sake. So I gathered all those weird things together. So I've set up a marriage index from 1660 to 1863, right up to the beginning of civil registration. And I started off small. It was launched with 10,000, but it's now, at the next update, it'll be 77,000. But none of these are from parish registers. Well, Irish parish registers. They're all from other sources, wherever, all over the world. And then, very recently, I've added births and deaths. I don't knit. Oh, righty-ho. Yeah, so there's the wills, and that huge, big, long link, but as I say, it leads you to magnificent things that are available. There's a whole backlist on the Irish Manuscripts Commission generally that is available now free, marvellous. And there's my marriage index, and you know, you've been a handout and you've got our website. Righty-ho, where have I got to now? Yeah, this way. Okay, well, if I push this on, I'll know where I am. All right. What you can find in the Registry of Deeds. Magnificent. This is a typical sort of abstract page. And it's pretty daunting to read, but, you know, if you kind of blow it up a bit big, you can read it, and once you start reading, it doesn't look like boring old legal terms anymore. This is a pair of women, young women in Waterford in 1835. Again, they should have been knitting, or if they weren't knitting, they should have been sitting with their crochet. And instead, what they were doing was, and there isn't a man mentioned in this thing, they were getting together, forming an official legal partnership, my dear. Because even sisters can't trust each other. Sorry, I have two in the audience. And they were going to set up a firm of coach builders. Not even a women's sort of firm. I thought, that's glorious. I love it. Yeah. So anyway, there we are. That's sisters. You can find all sorts of things. Early on, in the penal laws, under the penal laws, there was this horrid thing of Protestant discoverers. Have you heard of them? Horrid. Whereby, under the penal laws, you could get up, if you were a member of the established church. Now, we're not talking dissenters or anything, because they suffered under the penal laws as well. You know, Quakers and other dissenting people. But if you were a member of the established church, you were all right. And you could get up, and you could point to so-and-so down the road and say, that man is Catholic, and he is holding on to his lands. These lands have been in his family for, 500 years. He is holding on to those lands against the laws, because under the penal laws, the Catholic was obliged to divide down his land into as many children as he had, and, you know, he wasn't, all the old estates were broken up. So you get up and denounce him, and if that was upheld, your man here would get the land. There was one guy in Dublin, and he made that his profession. And I understand he was involved in something like 2,000 of these. He often worked as an agent for someone else, because obviously he couldn't cope with 2,000 estates. Okay, but he got up, and the estates were passed over in this way. Horrid. Absolutely horrid. However, this one, and I have to say that the registry is full of them. Because when you sit and think about it, in all conscience, you know, whatever happened in the past, in all conscience, how could you look a man in the eye that had been your neighbour for years and denounce him like that? So, we have this thing called the false discoverer. And it looks like, pretty horrid, this John Wilder and his buddy in Dublin, dishing the dirt on the Derry Nugent and all that sort of thing in Armagh. Horrid. Until you realise she's his mother-in-law. Okay. So, it was all a set-up. John Wilder is Church of Ireland. He might not necessarily be Church of Ireland, but for, you know, for, as far as the state is concerned, he's practising Church of Ireland. So he gets up and he denounces the whole bags of the lot of them before your man in you know, the professional one does it. He denounces them. He's given the estate, and he holds it safely for his in-laws. And I have often come across in the Registry of Deeds, when the penal laws were relaxed in the late 1700s, I have come across deeds there, and when you read them, you think, what's going on here? And you realise that this is the grandson of the original false Church of Ireland discoverer, formally handing back the land to the grandchildren of the Catholic who was dispossessed 2 generations later when it was safe. Now, sometimes I went badly wrong and the grandchildren did the rats, but very often it worked. And that's how sometimes you find a Catholic family, you're not sure what went on in the land, but they're still, you find them at the beginning of the 1800s holding the lands that they had in the 1400s. And you think, well, what happened during the penal laws? And you might find that something like that happened. It's fascinating what you find in there. How close are we? We're all right. We're lunch in 15 minutes. So that's one of the things that absolutely grabs me about the Registry of Deeds, all these stories. I guarantee if I spend a day there, I'll find at least one deed that furnishes the synopsis of a novel. You know, with the family stories behind it. It is wonderful. So, how do you start your search? And one of the things I say, because people sort of say, well, it'd be years before I can get a chance to go to Dublin and sort that out. You don't have to. If you go to Dublin, yes. If you go to the Registry of Deeds, yes. But I have to say, if you do go to the Registry of Deeds, try to bring 2 strong nephews with you. Because the books weigh a stacking ton, and if they're anything above chest level, you will be in hospital trying to lift them up. I mean, the health and safety. It is exhausting. It is exhausting. But you don't have to go there. Because way back in the 1950s, the Latter-day Saints went in and they filmed every last page of every last book. And they're all available. LDS centres, if you can get to one. If there's one comfortable. There's one here, isn't there? There's a few around. I'm very lucky because I live in London. And I go down to the National Archives in Kew, where the LDS are very happy guests. And every last one of the books up to about 1810 are on microfilm there on long-term loan. So I don't even have to wait, because you know, if you go, if you order a film to read it in an LDS centre, it can take sort of 4 to 6 weeks to get it. So what you need to do is come over and see me in London and go down to Kew for the day. It is so simple. Righty-ho. I don't know whether it enthused you enough yet, but there's wonderful things, as I say. I've come across recently not just those 132 tenants, but I've come across a family of silk weavers in Dublin, and it names all the in-laws, and they were, you know, letting out this bit and letting out that bit, and there was somebody else involved. And these are just ordinary working people. The other thing I talked about was the lives in the lease, which again is a magnificent thing, because it's usually somebody related to the person who's getting the lease, but not always. And they name usually young people. So they'll say, and usually 3, but sometimes more. So you'll get Mr. Carroll letting to Mr. Brennan, and the lives in the lease are Thurlock Brennan, aged 9, his nephew, and Redmond Brennan, aged 12, his eldest son, and so on. So you can build up a whole family that way. Magnificent. One of the ones I was thinking of was lovely. The lives in the lease were the grandfather, the son who was getting the lease, and the grandson. 3 generations named and described. Lovely. Another I looked at, your man decided for good measure to throw all his 6 sons into the lease as lives, and they're all mentioned and the order of birth given. Lovely. This is just an ordinary guy, you know? I don't know what he was. Coachman? Something? You know, it's magnificent. What else can one say about it? Just keep looking. And as I say, you go to Dublin, you bring your nephews. Because that's what it looks like. And if you look at that desk, The height of that desk is about up to here. So you get some idea of, I should really have put an Egypt there among, you're not allowed to photograph in there now, but it was a pity that there wasn't an Egypt standing there, so you get some idea. And if you're trying to get one from the top, you want to be an Olympic athlete, but when you open them, they are magnificent. So if you manage to get to Dublin and you've got your nephews, have fun. All right. We'll leave it there and see if there are any questions, because we don't want to break into our lunch hour. There's a lady there with questions.
Well, they're not called tombstones for nothing.
They're not called tombstones for nothing. They could kill you.
The names of the Protestant discoverers, because I know there were a couple affected one of my family.
I can't remember the name of that bag zone in Dublin.
As well. I was just hoping your memory might be better than mine.
No, my memory is, I've spent 3 days in West Cork and I could look it up and send it to you. Do you know what I mean?
That's okay.
Yeah? Another question down there. Yeah.
Just a point of information. I was looking into first registration, and I did some research on the history of registry of deeds and how the land registry was set up, which is the other arm, so to speak. And around after the 1903 Act of the Land Act, about 1910, there was a lot of sales of estates to obviously to Catholics, so they were the people, the tenants. So the first registrations were done in the land registry. So then they became folios afterwards they were done in the registry of deeds.
Yeah.
So you look at the registry of deeds books. And I was looking at for ages trying to figure out what was happening, and I discovered from the first registration of the property, which is then transferred into the land registry. But it's useful because I didn't think those records would be in the registry of deeds, because in the land registry there's no historical documents, there's only present day.
Yes, there's a lot of reading you can do before you ever walk in the door there.
Whole townland like that, and you'll find the transfer over. It's kind of hard to explain, but anyway, it does, as you say, gives a lot.
Well, let's remember that this was all dreamed up and organised by lawyers. And enough said. Enough said. And some of the wordier deeds, when you start reading them, are absolutely dreadful. But don't forget, many of them were being paid by the word.
Hi, just a small comment on researching in the Registry of Deeds, and I completely agree about nephews or some kind of able-bodied person. I think it's an awful shame that the Registry of Deeds are so strict on not allowing you to photograph the books.
It seems crazy when you think that the LDS have filmed every last book there, and there's no logic to it, except that it's not sort of owned by the state, it's not owned by the National Archives in that way, it's part of the legal system, and that's the only explanation I've been given. It's part of the legal setup, and for that reason you're not allowed to photograph. But it does seem ludicrous, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I noticed in particular some of the older townland indexes are becoming so worn that they're actually illegible at the corners from constant use.
It's very frightening, because I've been researching this for over 30 years, and I've made less than a dozen visits, I would think, to the actual Registry of Deeds. I've done it all remotely. But when I go, I'm horrified at the lack of attention given by some of the readers there, flicking over the pages. No white gloves. It's really heartbreaking, you know.
Thanks, Rosa. Great presentation. Very, very enjoyable and very entertaining, as well as incredible.
Enjoy the Registry of Deeds.
Even more difficult than taking down the tombstones from the top is returning them. And even though you're asked to return them, I never do, because it's absolutely too hazardous.
I quite agree.
Though, if you're looking at the TANBAN registers on the microfilm, are they actually legible?
Very few of them are fully legible. It's heartbreaking, because, for instance, I go to Kew and I think, oh, I look such and such and such and such up. I blow them up, I do all sorts of IT whizzy-jiggery, but really they should be re-filmed, especially as the originals are being abused.
I mean, the originals are pretty well illegible most of the time anyway. You're very fortunate to get some, nugget of information out of it.
Yeah. I think, I don't know who to ask, who to lobby about it, but it is frightening the way they're deteriorating.
Thank you.
There's a gentleman up here, Jim. Oh, that means trouble. Oh, yes. You're not going to give me a hard time now, are you?
No, just to put in a word for the very bright gentleman who came up with the idea of making the large tombstones, which cause us all so much trouble. The upside is that in the Registry of Deeds, for over 300 years, not one single book has been stolen.
Right? Yes. 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 It's not the sort of thing you can slip down your knickers. Excuse me, I put on your coat.
I may be talking in the past because it's quite some years since I was in the Registry of Deeds. And if you asked for a copy of
The original memorial, yeah.
they actually went into the cellar and photocopied the original memorial.
Yes.
And it was a very small price then. I don't know what it might be now.
It's about €20.
But it's still probably worth it.
It can be worth it. I've ordered quite a few in the past. One turned out to be, it was a marriage settlement of an ancient great-grandmother. It was so beautiful that it was worth putting on the wall. It was just A3 size, lovely. I ordered another and I needed a wheelbarrow when it arrived. Same cost, but it must, it was, each page was about that size and it was, 40 pages long.
Well, just to enforce the information you can get. My father, when he was with me there years ago, took down a reference to a townland. He had a cousin at the farm there. And some years later, I had somebody wanted research that led me to the same townland. So I sent him the memorial. It was all, the original point of the memorial was to register a daughter who had married somebody in Dunmanway.
Yeah.
But then he referred to his son, who was a 9-member of Cork, who married Mary McCarthy, and these were the ancestors of the lady who was with me. So that's...
The serendipity to be found there is something else altogether. It's wonderful. There's a gentleman there. There's a gentleman everywhere.
I'm as frustrated as anybody else by not being able to photograph the deeds, but I do think that photography, and particularly flash photography, would be liable to damage that ancient document.
Of course, but most people would have iPads or something without a flash, and it's perfectly possible to, but you're not allowed to, as I say. What you can do is take yourself off to an LDS centre, and for a very small price, get a really good photocopy or a digitized copy downloaded onto a little disc.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that without flash it might be safe, but
yes.
If you've been to the Registry of Deeds, you know that there is usually nobody from the staff available in any of the half a dozen rooms that you might be in. So people would start doing it even if it was...
No, I'm not encouraging you, because if you look up in the ceiling, there are little cameras everywhere. But I wish they would look into the cameras more often and see people with sticky fingers go like this and come up and do something about that. I'm much more bothered by that. Because these days it's very rare to see somebody doing flash photography. It's well lit, the room, you don't need to, believe me. Sorry, there's just one little corner I found that didn't have a camera. You didn't hear that. I only did it once. I was in a hurry.
Me honour.
I'm going to be thrown in jail now. Right. Is that all right?
appreciate the years you've spent and your contribution to all of us. And the future people will be very grateful for all the work that you've done transcribing.
Here, here.